I'll get started then. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest in our webinar series on translation for children, which is a partnership between the Centre for Book Cultures and Publishing here at the University of Reading in the UK and the organisation Outside in World. Before we get started, there's just a couple of things to note. We are, as ever, we're recording this session, so just to let you know, and obviously the recording will be available for you to watch later. So that's just a reminder to everybody, because we're recording, and also to make this webinar as accessible and inclusive as possible, please can you make sure that while we're speaking, if you could just keep your videos off and your microphones off, so that we can hear everybody clearly. That'd be really helpful. Thank you. And we'd like to thank Walker Books for giving us permission to do this, to use Jeannie Baker's mirror in this webinar today. And also, we're going to be playing some audio described files. So fingers crossed that the technology works, but please do be patient if occasionally. It should be fine. We've tested it a million times. It's going to be fine. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Patricia from Outside in World.
Hi, everybody. I am coming in from Ikaria Island, Greece. So Kalispera from here. Thank you to Sophie and the Center for Book Cultures and Publishing, the most really amazing partners in organizing and offering this webinar series, which is dedicated to our mutual mission to cultivate deeper study of, education on, and advocacy for children's literature in translation. Our true thanks to all of you for being here in this series, which has really become such a connective and productive space for us to meet, exchange, learn, and generate like new stuff, like which is new for me, what I'm learning today, making change in our field of children's literature and translation. So thank you for co-creating and sustaining this space with us. I am co-introducing today in my role as a trustee and longtime colleague of Outside in World. As many of you know, Outside in World, OIW, is dedicated to exploring, promoting, and celebrating children's books in translation. And what a necessary, inclusive, and expansive aspect of children's literature we're exploring today with Rafaela Lemos and Nuno Bento. I first learned about their work in a wonderful interview that our great colleagues, World Kidlit, did with Rafaela some months ago. And it literally changed my world. Rafaela's work, her words, I know she's shy about it, but I was like, oh my God, I wrote immediately to Sophie, to our Outside in World colleagues, and I said, can we please do a webinar? And so here it is. So seriously, I'm really so excited. And what I really loved was in multisensory translation, you know, it's expanding the work, that's the book, but it's also expanding, crucially, the audience for children's literature and translation. And if we're to make it truly inclusive and accessible, we have to have transformations like this of the form, right? Not just who's represented, but what the formal modality is of the translation. So this is super exciting. Thank you, Rafaela and Nuno, for being here today, for your work, and for sharing your wisdom with us. Thanks.
Okay, so thank you so much, Patricia. I'm just going to introduce our speakers then and thank them profusely, to join my thanks with Patricia's for joining us today. So Rafaela Lemos was born and raised in Portugal, and she's very creative. After doing a modern languages BA in Spanish and Mandarin at the University of Hull, she then moved to London, where she completed a master's in audiovisual translations from the University of Roehampton. And she's currently working as a localization producer for a children's media entertainment company, and also working as a freelance illustrator and audiovisual translator. And joining us from Portugal today is Nuno Bento, who is a Foley artist and sound designer from Lisbon, Portugal, who's worked on several award-winning teams in sound on films, and is also, as I understand it, very interested in games design as well. So thank you so much for joining us. And to kickstart, the first question that I asked them to talk about is how and why you became interested in audio description and applying it particularly to translation for children. So I'm going to hand over to you guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining us today and being interested in our project. We're very excited to speaking about this. So it all started last year when I was doing my master's in audiovisual translation, and on this slide there is a picture of one of the scenes of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. For those who haven't seen this film, it's a mixture of animation and live action. And one of the assignments of my master's was to do a script for a bit of the film. And I just really enjoyed the challenge. It was super difficult, but I love to just watch the film and try to write the script in a way that conveyed the animation of Roger. Sometimes he had heart-shaped eyes and the fast-paced scenes as well. So it was a very fun challenge. And since then, I became very interested in audio description. During this time, this is a bit of a personal story, but one of my closest friends, she was pregnant with twins, and she just got the news that one of the babies was going to be born visually impaired from one eye. So that kind of fueled my interest to kind of understand how animation can be made accessible to everyone. So I really started thinking about audio description, in particular in children's content, just because that's my passion. That's where I work at the moment, and that's where what I wanted to do for my dissertation as well. And so it all started with this film, and suddenly my tutor at the time, he had a contact of Gisele Neves, and she is one of the biggest persons in Portugal talking about accessibility. And she was constantly challenging me and just thinking ahead out of the box. And my initial idea was to do from maybe audio description of a film for children, but then she mentioned books and graphic novels and picture books, and since then I then decided to do a picture book. So it all started then, and I chose mirror. It's a bit of a boring answer, but I just asked my friends, I asked around if anyone has a favorite graphic novel or picture book. And one of my friends suggested Window by the same author, Jeannie Baker. And that's the image that's on the bottom right corner. And the book was just beautiful. It was super visually stimulating. It's also created the same way as Mirror, so with natural materials, which creates different textures. And it's just truly a captivating book. And when I went to the shops to purchase the book, I've decided to ask for all of the books by the same author. And that's when it was given to me, Mirror. And I just love the concept of the book. I love that was mirroring two cultures. As Sophie said, I was born in Portugal and I now live in England. So, you know, battling between two cultures is constant for me. I'm always missing home. If I go to Portugal, I miss England. If I'm in England, I miss Portugal. So that concept really resonated to me. And I just thought the images were also so beautiful because, again, of the technique that the artist uses. She just uses like natural elements. And, you know, if she wants a picture of a tree, she's probably going to use the leaves from the tree. So I thought was a very interesting book to audio describe. Another thing was, obviously, this book doesn't have barely any text. There are a couple of notes from the author, but I thought that would challenge me even more to create a script that would not just describe the book and the images, but also kind of almost create a narrative whilst also following the narrative of the author and the initial intention of the author. So yeah, that's how I chose this book. And I'm very happy with the choice. I think it's a beautiful book. So we can start talking about the main challenges that I faced when I started thinking about the script. And that was the main challenge, creating the script. Obviously, this was the first time I was thinking about audio description, and I'm obviously in a very privileged situation where I've never had to think about this. And so I started researching audio description guidelines. There weren't many for this type of project. So to adapt picture books to audiobooks, it was much more in television or even theater. There are some more in galleries as well. But I focused a lot on the audio description guidelines from England and also from Portugal. And I tried to use them as much as I could in this project, even though sometimes would be quite difficult because a book obviously doesn't have the audio. So to create that audio, it was quite interesting to tackle these difficulties. And that's when Nuno was very helpful. We also just reconnected during this time, which was perfect because he was talking about what he was doing. I thought it was very interesting, the work of a Foley artist, and it was very helpful with creating all the sounds for this. And then the other challenge is the different types of visual impairment. Not everyone is born visually impaired, or, there are, for example, my friend's child, she's partially visually impaired. So I also had to think about this because, some people might have some visual information from the past, whereas others might not. So I wanted to create kind of a script that wouldn't be too patronizing, for example, not over-explain. I didn't want it to be overwhelmed for the listener. And I wanted to be engaging and not just a description of the pictures, as I mentioned. And because these are a mixture of images, it's kind of like a book full of little works to allow the script we are all entitled of our own interpretation. Can you still hear me? I think my Wi-Fi is going a bit slow.
I think we can hear you, Rafaela.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So yeah, and then the last challenge was to convey the mirror effect of the book. So the book is very big, and inside of the book there are two booklets. On the left side you see the representation of the Australian culture, and then on the right side the representation of the Moroccan culture. And it's mirroring the life of two families, just a normal day in life of two families. And I thought that concept was very interesting as well, because it doesn't really matter where we live, we all kind of have the same similar values, especially when it comes to family. This conveys the life of the day in life of two little boys with very similar days, even though they live in completely different cultures. So I wanted to make sure that the audio that we were creating would represent this mirror effect. So to tackle these challenges, we used quite a few techniques and strategies. The two main strategies I used was egg phrases and sound painting, and I learned the concept of egg phrases while I was doing my research for this dissertation. And it is basically a literary description and narration of a work of art. And it was used in ancient times it was kind of like used as a poem to describe either an action of like a scene or a work of art. And nowadays it's more defined as a literary narration. So this is what I wanted to do, and what I was trying to explain with kind of move away from just being a description because in the end of the day, this is an entertaining book, and I wanted it to be entertaining. I didn't want to just be describing exactly what the images are. So I tried to follow the narrative from the book and just got a bit creative with it as well. And then, of course, sound painting, which Nuno did that part basically with his sound effects and the Foley art. And I do think the sound painting was crucial for this, because there was some information from the images that wouldn't make sense in the narrative, because again, I wasn't just describing them. So whenever I couldn't add that information to the narration, the sounds would play with that. And I think it was a great way to add all of the information that we wanted without becoming too overwhelming. And then the narrative sequencing, this is, in my opinion, the most clever part of the project, and it was Nuno's idea, so I think I'm gonna let him explain.
I mean, we both talked about it. It really wasn't just me that can take all the credit for this. It was a lot of experimentation.
Yeah.
There's a cool trick that we use when we're creating mixes or music or anything sound related. Usually when we don't have an image, a film, a picture that we can look at to take a reference from, it's often very useful to just close your eyes and think about the sound in the context of where it is placed, so we can make sure that it sounds properly, or it's well placed, or it can function with every other sound, regardless of any other visual stimuli or any other sort of support. So first, I think I tried to present Rafaela with the fully left side and fully right side story happening almost at the same time, which was just completely overwhelming and impossible to get any sense of. And then I tried to start and move around the positions of certain elements to accommodate the reading order in a way that we would have looking at the book from left to right, and trying to create a space in this soundscape where you could easily identify which part of the book was which. And not only the panning helped a lot, but there was a few things that we could do with the sound design and narration in order to keep it simple, accessible, and not, as Rafaela said, super overwhelming or overwhelming at all for anyone. Very specific details and ambient sounds are almost fully panned to 1 year, but the narration only moves slightly throughout the scene. And that made it work, I think, really, really well. I think after going back and forth with Rafaela, we both agreed that this was absolutely the best way we found.
Yeah, that's right. So there's a graphic on the slide that I used for my dissertation. Whenever I try to explain this, it gets really confusing in my own head, but I'm going to try my best. But so basically, the beginning of the pilot audio that we did, there's a description of the cover and the back cover, and that's that can be heard 100% on both ears. But then whenever I'm describing the Australian side, it's more audible on one side of the canals, correct?
Yeah,
so
the
it's more
channels.
audible
Yeah.
on the left side, and then you can still hear the sound effects on the right side. And then when I'm going to talk about the Moroccan side, the sound kind of travels to the other ear. And this is to not just to represent the mirroring effect of the book, but also to keep the representation of how the two cultures read, because in Arabic, Arabic is read from right to left, and we wanted to also keep that within the audio, because when you read the book, you can, if you are from an Arabic speaking country, you are going to read it from right to left. If you are from Australia, you'll read it from left to right, and both make sense. And this is what we wanted to convey with the audio. And that's why I think this narrative sequence was so clever, and it works really well. And we also added the page turning in between the descriptions and narrations, which was a fun part to record, because I just couldn't, it's like I forgot how to turn a page. It didn't feel natural at all, but we got there in the end. And we have a few different ones as well, so the sound is always ever so slightly different, which really helps bringing an organic feeling of reading a book. And I personally think it's a very clever feature of the audio. And then, as I mentioned before, we also used audio description guidelines and techniques on the script, which it was a big challenge, because again, this is a project that there aren't many people doing it, and therefore there aren't many research, and I couldn't find any guidelines to adapt picture books to soundscape audiobooks. Mostly of them was actually from Josélia Neves. She was my supervisor during my dissertation, which I'm so grateful for. She was amazing, and she helped me loads. And so I tried to kind of use what I knew and what I could research, and try to adapt that for this project. So when I created the script, I tried to have 3 different steps. So I had, the first step was contextualization, which means that I was identifying the type and function of the images. In this case, obviously, it's the pictures of the collages that the artist did, and the intention of the artist, which in this case would be entertainment, and also it had an educational purpose. And then the second step was, of course, description. For example, the characters, the composition of the images, the aesthetic choices. I spoke a lot about colors, because from what I could research from the author's website, she really emphasized all the colors. They were very important to help as well, again, mirror both cultures. And then the relationship, which meant that I had to really reflect what was being represented by these images and what exactly the artist wanted to transmit to their audience. So when writing the script, this was a completely new experience for me. I'm not a creative writer, so I really had to try my best to not stick to describe the pictures, but also not to let myself go wild with the creativity. One of my first ideas was a bit crazy. I wanted to the moon is very present on the book, on the covers and the back cover, you can see the moon. And my first idea was that the moon had some sort of superpowers, and the kids would switch lives and experience different cultures. But that's too much of my own interpretation of the book, which would also be wrong to assume that's everybody's interpretation. So I had to stop myself from being so creative, basically. And it was a big challenge because, again, I've never written anything creatively, and I had to find names for the boys as well, which I didn't know where to start from. But yeah, so eventually I did write the script. We have the first part, it's kind of like a table, and the first table has the time codes. The second one, the sound effects. This was kind of as a guide for Nuno. Basically, I wrote what I felt like it would fit in the narration, certain things like animals on the background or cars. And then the last table is the narration and the description. So within the audio description guidelines that I used, one of the most common ones that I researched was the usage of the present tense. And I felt like this was particularly important for this project because when the act of reading a book is always the present, you're always reading the book at that moment. So I felt like it was important to always speak in the present tense. I also read during my research that the present tense is important to make everyone feel included in that moment and not feel like the audience doesn't feel like they're missing out or they're receiving that information delayed. So I made sure that I always use the present tense, which in this case is easier to do. Sometimes when creating scripts for TV or movies or TV series, sometimes can be a bit trickier because sometimes you do have to speak in the past. But for this specific project, I really made sure that it was always in the present tense. The second one was the articles. So I also read that there's actually a testimonial on one of the books that I researched when I was writing my dissertation. And it was a visually impaired AD user. And they claim that if someone says to me, a man gives her the watch, it implies some significance to the watch, which it may or may not have importance in the plot. So I thought this was very interesting. So I made sure that the first time I mentioned this specific object, so a red and yellow scarf, a metal teapot, and an oil lamp, I didn't use definite articles. But then, as I'm going to show with the audio, at the end of the script, we already used the definite article, so the red and yellow scarf, because this information was already given prior. So the audience was already aware of the objects. Let me just try and find the time codes. It is 4:20.
Blue metal jug, an oil lamp, paired by their mother. The yellow and red scarf next to the blue metal jug, an oil lamp, give root.
Okay, so maybe it was a bit quick, but it did say the red and yellow scarf next to the metal jug. So this was an example of how I was conscious about the using of definite articles. And finally, this for me was one of the most important to learn about colors, because when we think about visual impairment, obviously, as I said before, there are different types, and sometimes people are born visually impaired, sometimes they're not, which means that they might have some visual information. And also, I think colors can be taught. It doesn't mean that you ever, even if you have never seen the sky, you know that the sky is blue. And this color representation helps kind of painting the picture as well. And as I mentioned before, colors were very important for the author. She mentions at some point that the blue skies represent so much Australia as represent Morocco. So I wanted to make sure that I was describing the colors of the pictures. And in these slides, there are two pictures. The first one is from the Moroccan side, and we can see the blue skies, the pink mountains, the green fields. And then the second picture is the Australian side, and the Australian kid is showing a picture that he drew. And in that picture, there are the blue skies and the pink mountains, which again, it really touches that juxtaposition of cultures. So I thought it was important to include the colors of the images. Right, next we have the audio. So I'm gonna let Nuno do the talk and explain what he did with the sound effects as well, and how he kind of used his experience as a Foley artist to help me loads with this project.
All right. What is the next PowerPoint going to give me some pointers to start off from?
Yeah, so the audio is kind of, if you can talk about how you adapted your experience as a Foley artist for this specific project, if you changed the way that you usually do things, because obviously this was aiming children. So I don't know if that's mostly your experience, probably not. Did you change the way that you kind of do things, or did you just follow the guides that I gave you? Because obviously I gave you a script with the things that I could see in the pictures and that I felt like it would fit in the narration. Did you just follow that?
Of course, it worked as a baseline for everything that I knew for sure that had to be included as the script. It was extremely important to have at least an underlying description of the sound before I started working, so I could fully understand, and by talking to you, to Rafael, to understand how she felt towards the backgrounds, towards the moods, towards the general ambiances in each part of the world. Since there's not much to go by in terms of natural ambient sounds that can completely distinguish one place from the other, the biggest challenge that sometimes I have to deal with is how to make a background sound or a soundscape for a film or even for music, where you want the audience to be transported to a specific place or even time, but you're not going to be using any sort of, I don't mean to say cliche, more like Rafaela mentioned earlier, we didn't want to be patronizing even with the sound. We didn't want to give the typical Western view of a Muslim country living with prayers all day or something like that. A very narrow, shallow vision of what the life, day-to-day life really is. Since the depiction in the book is of two normal families living two normal lives, just in different parts of the world, I tried to include some subtler elements that I wouldn't have done in a film, because film wouldn't allow me certain liberties since I'm locked into a picture. Since I'm not locked into a picture, my work changes a lot, because now I'm trying to focus on the meaning of the words and the subtleties of the images that Rafaela sent me. She took pictures of every part of the book that we were working on, so I could have a sense of what the artist was also representing. And I do admit that I used a few things that I thought they were just funny, especially on the Australian side, because I wanted it to be fun in some way, regardless. So I did put in some, let's call them cliche. Not cliche, not exactly cliche, but I did have some fun placing music in the Australian scenes. You can listen to AC/DC at the beginning when the car arrives, which I did it just because I thought it was funny. It's not necessarily a reference that anyone above 40 is going to get. But I also did include Tame Impala, and I chose the song Feels Like We're Always Going Backwards for the interior when the dad and the kid arrives to greet their mom. In the Arabic world, the biggest shift for Morocco was trying to, so this is why it's so, it can get a little tricky. Even though it's so creative, it's still tricky not to go a little too overboard. I try to apply a little more of cars, electronic, city background noises, tamely, but they're still there on the Australian side, and try to have a more windy, more movement of people talking and moving around and doing, trying to represent in audio the everyday moving around in the city like a Morocco. So that for me was the big juxtaposition between the two. It's precisely the way that the ambience texture feels, if that makes sense. Even the footsteps are more gravelly, more, I'm not gonna say, you can feel in the textures of the sounds where the characters walk and the animals' presence, and even the languages that they speak and the backgrounds of where they are. Since in Australia, it's a very like almost suburban-like environment. At least that was the sense that we got. And Morocco was more in the middle of something happening. They are taking care of donkeys, and they just had this big drive to get a new computer, and it's almost like a bigger celebration in a way that they are going to have access to these things. And I also played around with my own interpretation of the book, because I did have certain liberties that Rafaela could not have with words. So I placed a few bits of things that spoke to me, and I thought it would be cool to introduce them. In the moment that I remember most particularly is when they turn on the computer, and Rafaela wrote that now they can access the whole world with just one click. I sampled the speech from Carl Sagan's Pale Blue Dot as a representation of what they can do now that they have access to this computer, to this device connected to the internet. That's the type of thing that I was able to creatively put in and give some extra meaning to everything. I hope I didn't ramble too much. I have the tendency to do that.
I don't think so, but I don't know if anyone else thinks so. But that's right. I think with your sounds and my narrative, I think you were really able to add the information that I wasn't able to put into words. And I think that's where sound painting really plays a vital part in this project. So yes, the next question was what pages we did and why we chose those pages. And I'm trying to go to the next, there it is. So we wanted to do a continuous kind of sequence rather than do random pages, just because we thought in an audio perspective this would work better. So we did the cover and the back cover, and then we jumped to the end of the book. And this was just because I personally felt like these images were the most challenging and interesting because they have a lot of information. So in these images, both spreads, they show the family having a meal, and then little squares with different types of activities that both families are doing as almost like a night routine kind of thing. And I just imagine that this could be very interesting in an audio perspective, not just the narrative, but also what Nuno could do with his Foley art. And if it's okay, I'm going to play a little bit, just looking at the time code, and it's 2:28.
And Noah offered her a pink flower. Noah's mum prepares a cup of tea for the dad whilst doing the dishes and tidying the house. Noah's dad enjoys the tea offered by the mother. and starts working on the fireplace whilst Noah drinks his juice, plays with his little sister, and writes a text about his toy cat. It has 2 ears, 2 eyes, 4 legs, and he has creamy fur all over his body. He goes meow. His name is Tiddles. Tonight, the dinner is fish and chips, and while they wait for the food, Noah is surfing the web. When they arrived home, Omar and his dad are welcomed by the mother, who's holding his sister on her back and balancing a bucket on her head. They both take the shopping inside the house. While Omar feeds the chickens and sheep, the dad serves tea to the rest of the family, feeds the donkeys, and removes and unpacks the big box they brought from the market, removing a computer tower.
Okay, I think that's enough. I hope you were able, this audio works much better with headphones, but I hope you could sense the sound traveling now. I don't know, I think there is a chat where I can't see it, but I hope you could kind of feel the sound going from left to right when the narration went from the Australian side to the Moroccan side.
Sorry, Rafaela, I think that because of Zoom's trying to denoise anything that's in a voice, it cut out every element that we added.
You couldn't hear the audio, or you couldn't
you
hear
can hear the audio, but the voice is clearly being denoised, treated to remove the backgrounds.
Okay, well, the audio is going to be available, so I can send it to everyone. But yeah, so I just wanted to show an example of the pages that we did. And as I said, these were the most interesting for me because both sides have a lot of information, and it was, I don't know about Nuno, I think it was very fun to do this part. And I had a lot of fun here, your interpretation and the way that you kind of translated these images into sounds with the cat, and also the thing that they used to put to build the fireplace.
Yeah.
All of the sounds, I think it was very interesting.
I love them, and I think they worked pretty well. I'm kind of sad that the Zoom is only allowing us to hear the narrator and forcibly removing everything that's the background noise. But yeah, this was incredibly fun, and it took us a long time to reach something like this. It was a lot of back and forth, but yeah, extremely fun.
Are we okay? Have I lost internet, or I'm not sure I can change the settings to try and denoise things. That sounds like far too technologically advanced for me. I'll have a go while you're talking, but
Okay.
Have we lost?
I think Rafaela was lost. She just sent me a text. The internet went down in her house.
I think she's just joined us again.
Okay.
Perhaps we could move to this sort of just that idea of translating sounds was quite interesting. While we're because that was one of my questions to you, isn't it? Is we know about the need to translate words, but how do we translate sounds? Was that something you had to kind of think about at all?
Yeah, Rafaela will want to touch on the subject, but in general.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there she is.
I'm back. Sorry. Can you still see my screen, or? I could hear you. Okay, let's see.
All right. Yeah.
So you were talking about translating sounds, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. There you go. Sorry about that, everyone.
It's fine. There has to be sound-wise a context if I want to change, if I want to represent a certain animal or a certain idea. I do have to use whatever the expectation of that sound is, and not what the sound actually is, not necessarily. So in Foley work, a lot of times when we're performing to the films, we're not working with the intended, like with the actual props or objects in the film. We're using something that can represent the expectation of that sound in a clearer, more I'll say vibrant way. Like if you want to put a jug of water on top of a wooden table, maybe an actual jug filled with water won't sound as good as like a small crystal resonating glass that will make the point of that that jug of water being put down on the wooden table much more pleasant, or it will make the sound itself more interesting for a film. So we're working off expectations of what we heard in films and what we heard in reality, and lots of our own perceptions of sounds have been changed through cinema's history. I'm willing to bet that probably almost everyone in here assumes that the lion sounds like the old MGM logo, and the lion doesn't sound anything like that. That's actually the sound of a tiger. It's meant to create an idea, not to represent reality. And that's why we grow up with the idea that the roaring lion is that old MGM like roar, and it's something that everyone has always used ever since. Because if now we suddenly have a lion in the audiobook, for example, I cannot put an actual lion because no one will understand that's what the lion sounds like, unless I'm specifically referencing a lion or something like that, but it will still sound very off. And it's the same with every other sound. There's a lot of, it's something that I would love for people to try. If you know someone that's into audio, just try and listen to the world through headphones and have that augmented reality experience of listening to the world around you as microphones do, because it's a very, 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 very different experience. It's a very different world. So we take advantage of this in cinema. Our brains react much faster to sounds than they do to visual stimuli. We process whatever the sounds are and where they are in a much faster and more coherent way than we do pictures. We have an effect called the cocktail effect that is very hard to explain. I don't think any research has been able to fully understand how it works. It's a simple concept that all of us have experienced being in a busy, in this case, it comes from a cocktail party where you have a bunch of people talking all around you and you can still focus on one specific conversation. Even if it's not happening right next to you, if you want to focus your ears to a couple talking, you can do that. You can focus on a conversation, and that's very weird. It's very strange. So there's a lot of things that we still don't understand how sound works. And there's a lot of things that when we're making sound design or we're making sound for a picture, we have to take all of these things into consideration. And the final point would be that, yes, sounds do need to be translated, but it's not something that's specific for an audiobook. It's something that's specific for any audiovisual or audio-only medium. As crazy as it may seem, I swear, if you guys go listen to a lion right now, you'll be super disappointed.
Thanks. Just to say, I have actually adjusted the settings. I had a go. So if you did have a sort of a last example to play, it might work. Fingers crossed.
Me too. I've added the audio here. I've lost the time code, but it does show how Nuno was saying before that he used some bits of audio that he thought was funny. And one of them was the greetings of each country, which was
Yeah.
really clever. I don't remember exactly the time codes, but I'm going to try and I'll find it.
And on the left side, the book starts with a note from the author. On the right side, written in Arabic, and on the left side in English. There are 2 boys and 2 families in the...
Could you hear that?
No, it's still drowned out.
Okay. Well, as I said, I'm going to make the audio available for everyone, and then you can go back and listen to these funny bits. Also, on this slide, there is a picture of the international pigs, and pigs that have different nationalities, and therefore the noises are different. I think this is very interesting as well, the way that we say that animals do. It changes from country to country. I had that experience at work the other day where I had to do some sort of animal. I can't remember which one it was, but I did it away, and I think it was dog, and I did it the noise that I'm used to, and then all of my English colleagues were doing it a different way. And then we realized that it's obviously because cultural differences. Speaking of cultural differences, I'm just going back a couple of slides to talk about the interlingual translation challenges, because I did write the first script in Portuguese. So not only we translated images into sound, we also created the narrative completely into Portuguese. And although the book doesn't have much text to translate and to face these common translation challenges, there was a very obvious one, which was fish and chips, which is the meal that the Australian family is having. And I just wanted to mention that because I was writing straight away in Portuguese, and Portuguese is my native language, again, this wasn't a major challenge, but I did have to use some, translation strategies to translate these parts. And I just did a very literal translation, because in Portuguese, we don't really eat fish and chips the same way that is eaten in England and apparently in Australia, but we also have peixe frito for those who are Portuguese in here. So I just translated like that. So I wanted to include here just to reference the interlingual challenges, interlingual translation challenges. But yeah, that wasn't a major issue. The major challenge was definitely translating the pictures into a soundscape audiobook. And then we would have the translation of the sounds, which Nuno explained. And I just wanted to give some examples of accessible entertainment that is out there. And the first picture is from the video game The Last of Us, which was very popular, the last one, for a number of reasons. There is now a TV show, and it made headlines at the time when it came out because it's super accessible. So there is audio description, and I believe that it also has HOH, so subtitles for deaf or hard of hearing. And this also shows how much accessibility is a very attractive field and exciting, because people are, I feel like, paying more attention to it and making an extra effort to make sure that all media and entertainment is accessible for everyone. The second picture is from the book The Hours, and this is from the audiobook. This book is set in 3 different eras. The first one is when Virginia Woolf was writing the book, Mrs. Dalloway, and there are 2 eras that are set nowadays. And the audiobook also has sound effects, and I'm not sure if it's considered Foley art, but it has sound effects. And I thought it was super interesting how they use the sounds to make us travel through the different eras of the book. The third picture is just a random picture that I found online, and it's representing the tactile visits that you can find in galleries. So there are already visits that you can actually touch the pieces of the art, the work of art, and you can kind of have a sense of how they feel. I believe that they also exist in theater. And also the last one is a book by Rafaela Lemos, and it's a multisensory book, and it's very clever. It has text, it has pictures, it has braille, it has an audiobook, and also a video book with sign language in Portuguese. So I wanted to leave this here, which I used as a kind of inspiration when I was writing my dissertation. So I kind of wanted to give credit to this. And then lastly, we have our conclusions and hopes for the future. So my conclusions during this dissertation was that definitely, as I just mentioned, audio description is a very exciting field, and I truly believe that it's becoming more and more attractive as well for researchers. I definitely think in the world of translating picture books, definitely needs more research. I couldn't find most of the answers that I had. And obviously this project and my dissertation is just the very beginning of a way wider discussion. I felt like having sound painting, sound effects, Foley art was crucial for this. I don't think my audio would have the same effect if I didn't have Nuno's help. I feel like I could have benefited from a creative writer, so the narration would be maybe a bit more engaging, maybe not as descriptive, because I was quite self-conscious about if I was getting away from the original intention from the book. So saying that, I think if this was a real project, it would be very important to have a better communication with the author of the book, because this way, obviously, the narration would fit completely the narrative, and there would be no room for my own interpretation. It would be the intention of the author. So I feel like if things like this keep happening, definitely audio description can benefit the production of audiobooks, and definitely a communication with the author of the book and the audio describer and the sound artist definitely needs to be way better. So that's it. My last slide is just a bunch of references that I used for my dissertation, and they're there for future reference. And if anyone has any questions, or if anyone wants to add anything.
Hey guys, thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. So inspirational. As Eleanor says in the chat, thank you for your wonderful and inspiring work. We have had a question already, actually, from Ruth in the chat, who asks Nuno, how do you go about researching how to represent a country in sounds? What kind of research did you have to undertake to do that?
That's a really great question. It will always haunt me in a way. I was super lucky that at the time that Rafaela asked me to participate in this project, I was working with a director that was directing a documentary that the documentary was about a road trip that started in Lisbon all the way by car to Senegal. and the trip that this merchant made by car, and they documented the whole trip. They stopped in, and they actually stopped in Morocco. So I did have the chance to listen to some recordings that the director managed to get from the, I don't remember which city specifically they stopped in. But usually what I try to do is research the animal life present in the country. It's something that I always try to get right, make sure that even if nobody cares or nobody notices, it's usually considered a big waste of time, especially on smaller productions. But the natural life in the space is really important to me. Then I try to read about the city specifically where the things are set to get a sense of what goes on. In this case, I was looking through, there's these videos I love to watch on YouTube. They are just a 4K binaural, very long walks through cities where you can just spend like 2 hours just listening and looking through a city with someone else's ears and eyes. It's super interesting. That's the kind of stuff that I usually do for every project that I work on. Then I always want to have some musical references, something that's not super popular that would be playing on the radio, something that a teenager or a dad or a mom or someone would be listening to, not necessarily part of that time, just some popular, some popular, more music made for the country, by the country, for the people, with the people, not so much like any big productions, to including the ambiences. And then I have to look at the languages and cars. Like it's kind of easy to play around with voices, but there are certain languages that really fit for other countries, and there are some that don't work all that well. Like Portuguese works really well for Russians, for example, because it's a very similar sounding language, or Spanish and Italian. You can mix them around, but that's of course the last recourse. And yeah, that's usually my go-to list to make sure that that I'm not using my very limited Western view to represent other countries, since I do work on productions from all over the world. And luckily, I've been able to also have very cool sound recordings of specific places from all over the world.
Fantastic, thank you. Patricia has a question that she would really like to ask. Perhaps you could come on mic.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, thank you guys. That was so amazing. I love all the subtleties of language, all the ideological considerations as well, which leads me to my question, which is Rafaela, yeah, the question about the references to the book. Yeah, I think we'll probably include that when we send the video, all the references that people need. But it's about how these kinds of multisensory works can benefit all children, right? So that even if it's intended for visually impaired children or audiences, that bringing these kinds of works into classrooms, into spaces with children of all different abilities can, enhance their understanding of how to explore works, literary works, with all of their senses.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great question. I think this can benefit every children, every adult. Personally, I really like audiobooks in general, and sometimes I don't really I know it's different than reading a book. I don't want to get into that discussion, but sometimes I don't have time to read a book, so I'm going to listen to an audiobook. And you know, the delivery of the audiobook is so important. There are times that I try to listen to the audiobook, but the delivery is not that great, so I don't even finish it. And then if I'm going to read the book, is much better. So this shows how important it is that the production of the audiobook is good and engaging. In terms of children, I think more companies are trying to go beyond TV shows or YouTube. The company that I work for, it's very YouTube based, and they're an online first company, and they are trying to start doing more podcasts. They've just launched one podcast, which is folklore stories. So it's Grandma May. It's called Lullaby City Farm, if you are interested. And so it's Grandma May just telling stories, like folklore stories from different countries. This is incredibly important for children because they're getting in touch with different cultures without even leaving their rooms. And I feel like after COVID, this kind of promoted this sort of entertainment as well. And then there are a lot of parents that don't want necessarily their kids to be staring at a screen all the time. So, you know, things like podcasts and audiobooks are becoming more attractive for parents as well. I have a little niece, and I just gave her a box from Yoto, which she can put a card and listen to songs or listen to podcasts. She can listen to my voice telling her stories, you know. So I think it's definitely a field that is attractive for every children. It's just great that it really created as well an accessibility door for everyone, because it became literature so much more inclusive for everyone. And I do think audiobooks are incredible for that, especially if they're done, you know, for children. Not all the audiobooks I like to hear sounds, but for children, I do think they make them so much more engaging and entertaining. Because at the end of the day, you know, yes, it's educational, but we want to be entertained as well. And I feel like that's where the sound painting is very important.
Thank you so much. And I just thought, you know, it makes us better storytellers when we can get that fullness of the senses. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a question from Emma as well. Perhaps you'd like to come on mic, Emma.
Hi, thanks, Sophie. Thank you, Rafaela and Nuno. That was really fascinating. My question is about the accents of the narrators. I wonder if that's something that either of you have any sort of had thoughts about or input on, and if you have thoughts in general about, obviously all different languages come in a variety of flavors and accents, and that British accent that was reading this out is not what I would call an RP British accent. It has some regionalism to it, and I wonder how much of a choice that was, or if you have any thoughts in general, I suppose, about different national sort of varieties as well of languages, how much you think about standardization versus regional flavors.
That's a great question. I'm laughing because I just chose my partner because he's a native English and I didn't want to have my, my Portuguese accent spoiling the narration. And so I just asked him to do it, and he's from Hull. So he has a very thick, strong accent.
I could tell he's from Hull.
I personally,
wonderful.
I'm biased. I think it made it so much better. I love his accent. So, but that's a very interesting question. And as you said, countries have several different accents. I think it's the same in Portugal. We are very used to have a widely used accent, which is maybe from Lisbon because it's the capital, so it's more used. But I think it's important as well to start highlighting different accents, and I think it does bring a different type of flavor to the story. But yeah, in this case, it was purely because I just wanted his help because I wanted a native speaker, and his accent was all I had available.
Thank you, Rafaela. That's really interesting. And I definitely strongly agree that it's wonderful to have a variety of regional accents represented in all kinds of media. So it's really great to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, I think he did a great job. I love this accent and interpretation.
Absolutely. Okay, so I think we've covered all the questions that were in the chat and so forth, and everyone, you know, obviously if there are any other questions, do pop them into the chat or put your hand up or whatever. Otherwise, I think
sorry, Sophie, there is a question here. I don't know if I already spoke about this. Do you think that audio description could be used instead of audiobooks for some novels? I don't know if we mentioned this.
Yeah, I kind of thought that you'd really answered that in your sort of discussion about why you think what this multisensory translation can bring. But obviously, if you have anything more to say to that, go for it.
Yeah, I think I did touch on this when I was answering the other question. I don't think we should use one instead of the other. I think audio description can be used as well as audiobooks for some novels. I don't think they are probably used enough. You know, I'm definitely one of those people who chooses books by their covers. I like to have pretty covers on my shelf, so I feel like sometimes it would be good to have a description of the cover, for example. I don't think there are a lot of graphic novels being described. I think there's a website that does this, but it's more manga and this sort of very specific niche graphic novels, not so much for picture books in general. So yeah, I don't think it should be instead of the other. I think it should be both. I think it should be soundscape audiobook with audio description guidelines when it makes sense.
Perfect. Okay, so I think at this point, I just would wrap up by saying thank you so much, guys. It's been really, really interesting, and I've certainly learned absolutely tons and really, really enjoyed that. And we will try and get the sound. So apologies for the not realizing that Zoom had these denoising things. That's just far too kind of sophisticated for me to grasp. But we'll try and work out a way of getting some kind of examples of the audio, because it's really, really interesting to hear that alongside all of your discussion. So we'll see what we can do.
Okay.
But thank you so much, and thank you to everyone who joined us. It's lovely to see you all, and see you